You've spoken to the Communications Minister about his correspondence with the ABC.
Yeah, Paul Fletcher really putting the heat on the ABC board and Chair Ita Buttrose in particular with this letter to the board. He wants a response in 14 days about the controversial Four Corners program on Christian Porter and Alan Tudge. Have a listen to the interview. Paul Fletcher, thanks for joining us. So you've written to the ABC registering a number of grounds of complaint about the Four Corners program on Christian Porter and Alan Tudge, and you've given the Chair Ita Buttrose 14 days to respond. Will there be a formal complaint to the ABC if you're not satisfied with the answer?
Well, the starting point is that there's a set of duties that apply to the board of the ABC under the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Act. Section 8 of the Act sets out those duties to be accurate and impartial according to the recognised standards of objective journalism. So it's important to recognise that the ABC has editorial independence. That's set out in the Act. Parliament doesn't determine what the ABC covers or reports on, but the Act does set out duties that apply to the board. So what I have done is asked the Chair to respond to a range of questions about that Four Corners episode and essentially whether the board has met its obligations in relation to that program and the nature of the journalism embodied in it.
So if you're not happy with the response, what does it mean for the members of that board? Could they face action potentially?
Well, let's not get into those kinds of scenarios. What I've asked the ABC Chair to do is to consider my questions and come back with a detailed response. I mean, this is a duty that sits with the board. The ABC has internal processes, editorial processes, complaints mechanisms and so on. I would expect the ABC to carefully consider the questions I've asked and to come back with a response going to the sorts of issues I've asked about. For example, how is the story, what was covered in the program, consistent with, for example, the commitment in the ABC's code to the importance of privacy, whether there's been appropriate impartiality and lack of bias. And I've taken the time to assess the program and prepare a pretty detailed list of questions. And what I'd expect the ABC board to do is in turn carefully consider my letter and come back with a considered response.
It sounds like you might use the complaints mechanism if you're not happy with the response there.
Oh, well, look, I'm certainly not going to rule anything in or out. There is a complaints mechanism. But in the first instance, I'm writing this letter as the Minister with responsibility for the ABC, with responsibility for the legislation under which it operates. The legislation is very clear in the division of responsibilities between, on the one hand, the Parliament and the Minister, and on the other hand, the ABC itself. But it does also set clear responsibilities for the board, and so I'm asking the board to consider whether their responsibilities have been met in relation to the program.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the questions you pose, right? So why does the board consider it is appropriate that the privacy of the Attorney-General and Minister Tudge should be compromised by the way in which the program deals extensively with aspects of their personal lives? That's your question.
Yes.
So your question seems to indicate a potential breach of the principle of respect for privacy in the ABC Code of Practice. Is that your belief?
Well, again, what I'd say is I am asking the ABC's board to explain how it is satisfied that its statutory obligations and the principles set out in the ABC's Code of Practice have been met. And so there's a series of questions that go to matters that arise from the program, and it's for the ABC's board to now consider those questions and respond to them.
Because you're really putting the wood on them, aren't you? You're putting the heat on them, saying, come on, tending to say, this is my view, this privacy aspect appears to be breached, tell me why it isn't.
What I'm asking them to do is, as set out on the face of the letter, so on the question of privacy or any of the other questions, it's for the ABC to respond and to demonstrate, if they believe they can, that, for example, their code of practice, that the program was consistent with their code of practice. Now, what I would hope and expect is that these matters were very carefully considered before the program went to air. And again, it goes to the statutory responsibilities that the board carries. They're set out in the Act, and that is something then that must be followed in programs that the ABC produces, and that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, so you say, for example, why in the judgment of the board are the personal lives of politicians newsworthy, and you also question the targeting of Christian Porter's conduct at university. So clearly those are matters of concern for you, I guess, in terms of the fairness of the reporting. Again,
it goes to the question of whether the ABC board has discharged its obligations. The way the governance of the ABC is that you've got, it's provided with a substantial amount of funding, over $1 billion a year, in fact $1.07 billion, a lot of money, and then it appoints the managing director. The managing director is the editor-in-chief. Staff are employed and they go and produce programming. And then there's a set of internal editorial controls and processes. There's news judgment to be exercised as to what is appropriately newsworthy. And there's a set of criteria to be weighed up that are reflected in the ABC's own code of practice, including matters such as privacy, but also matters such as whether particular allegations are given appropriate weight, whether it's explained to the audience what weight they ought to be putting on these allegations. So these are the matters that I have asked questions about, and ultimately it links back to the governance processes within the ABC and the set of obligations that applies to the board and the managing director of the ABC.
Particularly, I guess, because the government had inquired of senior people of the ABC, it's been reported, the MD and I assume that even the chair about the program. Is that right?
Well, look,
prior to its hearing.
In the ordinary course, if a story is being prepared about a particular political figure, there's nothing out of the ordinary with, for example, a media advisor in that politician's office speaking with the journalist, with the producer, you know, what's this about, what is it you're going to be saying, here's why.
But did it happen higher up as well? Were there questions higher up from yourself or anyone else in government saying what's going on here? Or
I can only speak for myself and my office.
Sure.
It's on the public record that there was one conversation between my broadcasting advisor, my senior advisor covering broadcasting, and an ABC director about this matter. I did not myself have a conversation about this matter. Again, there's nothing unusual about that. My broadcasting advisor, as you'd expect, speaks to ABC executives and directors all the time. My point, though, is as Minister with statutory responsibility for the ABC, it sits within my portfolio and it operates under a set of statutory responsibilities set out in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Act. I have asked the ABC board through the chair to explain how the board is satisfied that it has met its responsibilities.
Well, a keen area of concern in the government, and it's mentioned in the letter, is the comments of Sarah Hanson-Young, where she gives a third-hand account of a conversation with a former staffer in relation to Christian Porter.
And she told me that she'd found herself in somewhat of a relationship and that clearly had found herself in a position that at some point she didn't want to be there.
It's been put to me the staffer who was seen at the public bar with Christian Porter says she never spoke to Sarah Hanson-Young. Is that true? Is this potentially a case of mistaken identity? And what do you think of the airing of those comments?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know whether it is a case of mistaken identity. What I do know is that the program made some factual claims that are pretty serious claims. They go to the reputation and the standing of the senior politicians, the subject of those claims. And it is an absolutely appropriate question in relation to the ABC's editorial processes. Are you satisfied as to the factual validity of those claims? And one of the questions the letter asks goes to, is it appropriate to include statements from Senator Hanson-Young that are presented in the program as corroborating other claims about an incident which may or may not have occurred at a bar in Canberra, noting, of course, that the individuals who are alleged to have participated in that incident absolutely deny that it occurred. So my interest as Minister...
And just on that, are you convinced that the staffer at the bar denied to the ABC that the incident occurred?
I stand by what I've said in the letter, and in the letter I've made the point that the ABC chose to run this claim in the program in the face of specific denials. Now, my interest as Minister with responsibility for the ABC is that the ABC is provided with very substantial public resources to do an important job, and it does a very important job for Australians. Its news services are trusted, respected and important, but with that comes high standards. Standards set out in the Act, and what I want to be satisfied of is that on the specifics of what is in this program, the way it was put together and the claims that were made, that the ABC board can demonstrate that the duties in Section 8 of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Act have been met, and that it's accurate and impartial according to the recognised standards of objective journalism.
Just let me ask on that. Just a couple of questions to go. The letter seems to basically accuse Four Corners of impartiality. Is it your view, is it the government's view, that Liberal members were deliberately targeted when other MPs could have been targeted?
The letter is asking the question of the board, given your duty of impartiality, why is it that the only politicians who were the subject of the story are Liberal politicians? That's the question that is asked, and I will wait to see what answer the ABC gives to that question.
But that sort of question implies that there's a consideration here that the government might have been stitched up.
I want the ABC board to explain to me as the Minister how the fact that this story deals only with Liberal politicians is consistent with the duty of impartiality.
Let me ask you finally, do you think there is any sort of problem or a problem generally with a culture within Parliament House in terms of the treatment of women? Do you think there's been some behaviour which the public shouldn't approve of in terms of the culture of Parliament?
Let's be clear. Every Australian woman has a right to work in a safe workplace. The Prime Minister's been very clear on that. Our government absolutely expects that women in Parliament House have a safe workplace, and with that comes a set of standards of behaviour that are rightly expected of politicians, of senior staff members, of anybody interacting in the workplace with others. So there is no question that we must maintain those standards in this workplace as in any other workplace in Australia. The questions in my letter, though, go to whether, in the way the Four Corners story was put together, the ABC has met its own standards in relation to matters like impartiality, respect for privacy, and the other requirements that are imposed on it by Section 8 of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Act, as amplified in the ABC's own code of practice.
Paul Fletcher, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.